Welcome to the US Eagle Claw channel. With a legendary show of heroism, the Ukrainian armed forces proved to the whole world that they can stand up to the Russian army. The Ukrainian armed forces, which carried out the biggest defensive war in Eastern Europe, is now teaching the Russian army about offensive. The superior effort of the Ukrainian army is bringing Ukraine one step closer to freedom. On the other hand, after Vladimir Putin's declaration of mobilization, the Russian Federation is moving towards total ethnic collapse, rebellion, and turmoil. Putin, who aimed to seize Ukraine in February and connect the Donbas region to himself, is currently in trouble due to different ethnic origin states affiliated with the Russian Federation. The possibility of the disintegration of the Russian Federation by coups from ethnic minorities and autonomous republics, and the firing of 3 new fronts against the Russian Federation that will be opened from within, shook the agenda this week. The mobilization announced by Vladimir Putin in late September brought the Russian people to the brink of a massive uprising and brutal protests by 80% of Russia. This flame, which spread to the big cities in all Russian lands, including Moscow, showed itself most in the autonomous republics. While trying to extinguish these flames, the possibility of a new mobilization decision from the Kremlin created new indignation in Russia. In this process, Vladimir Putin resorted to many political games in order to prevent the decisive advances of the Ukrainian army. But no political hypocrisy that Putin has tried has worked. Currently, the Russian leader trusts his decision to mobilize throughout the country, and the Russian leader wants to involve in this mobilization decision the autonomous republics that are dependent on Russia in certain aspects. In response to Vladimir Putin's decision to mobilize, autonomous republics and minority ethnic groups affiliated with the Russian Federation opposed Putin's arrogant decision, raised the flag of rebellion, and opened new fronts for Russia. Especially Chechens, Dagestanis, and Buryats are among the autonomous republics that will open a war front against the Russian Federation. As you may recall, the fact that Chechens sent to Ukraine crossed the ranks of Ukraine and fought against the Russian army actually ignited the first flare for these events. President of Ukraine, Zelensky, addressed the citizens gathered by the Russians from the minority republics. In a video addressed to the Caucasian, Siberian, and other indigenous peoples of Russia, the Ukrainian leader told potential soldiers that they did not have to die in Ukraine. Wearing a black sweatshirt with the words "I am Ukrainian" written on it, Zelensky stood by a plaque commemorating Imam Shamil, a 19th century cleric who led the resistance against Imperial Russia in the Caucasus in Kiev Square. Zelensky gave a new breath to the fire waiting to shine in the hearts of autonomous republics with the symbolic messages he gave, along with his statement. Referring to different ethnic groups in Russia, Zelensky said, "Dagestanis do not have to die in Russia's vile and disgraceful war. Chechens, Ingushs, Ossetians, Circassians, and other peoples that fall under the Russian flag. There are a total of 200 ethnic groups. Minority ethnic groups in Russia, none of them have to surrender to Russian pressure." The Ukrainian head of state advised that citizens in the autonomous republics under Russian rule should fight only for the freedom of their own countries. Here, Chechens come first among the most important autonomous republics and minority groups that will open a front against Russia. Dagestanis and Buryats are also groups that have suffered a lot from Russia's oppression and persecution. The protests that broke out for the first time in Chechnya in the past days were a sign that alarm bells were ringing in Russia. It was previously reported that Chechen sheikhs organized anti-Russian people in Chechnya to fight against Russia. In addition, Buryats and Dagestanis were forcibly sent to Russia's Ukraine campaign, and thousands of them had to die in Ukraine. The Russian autonomous republics and minorities have completely reached their borders, and their anger towards Putin will not cease if the situation continues like this. Currently, Chechens, Dagestanis, and Buryats oppose Putin's mobilization decision and all other pro-war decisions and reject the Kremlin's instructions. Putin can now hear these alarm bells very closely because Chechens and other minority groups fought with Russia for years. Most minority groups refuse to live under the Russian dictatorship and have kept the fire of freedom alive in their hearts for many years. But after seeing the weakened Russian army in the Ukraine war, it is quite normal that minorities think they have an opportunity. In addition, the fact that they sent their own children to death in vain with the mobilization decision issued by Russia caused them to find a very valid reason for rebellion. Protests against Putin and mobilization in Dagestan and Chechnya made quite a stir, but Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who did not want to give up on his aim, did not let go of their autonomous republics. Sending Russian Guard regiments to these countries, Putin sent many people from these republics to Ukraine to realize the 300,000 volunteer Russian military project specified in the mobilization decree. The Russian Guard regiments, which are still recruiting volunteers, are putting the military criteria into the background, just like in Ukraine. The Russian Guard regiments, which recruited soldiers to fight in Ukraine, forced many citizens to volunteer, regardless whether they are sick or elderly, in line with Putin's orders. Russian President Vladimir Putin is somehow trying to keep the autonomous republics calm with his own allies he has put at the head of these republics. However, the failures of the Russian army in Ukraine do not ease the tension of Putin's troubles. The military failures suffered by the Russians will inevitably lead to political restructuring in Moscow. And while President Vladimir Putin is unlikely to get anywhere in a hurry, this is expected to inevitably affect the situation in Belarus. It has already caused the political weakening of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and the loosening of his sense of power, which he had firmly adhered to. As European foreign policy expert Pavel Kebev wrote recently, Mr. Lukashenko has so far managed to resist pressure to directly participate in the invasion of Ukraine. But the February offensive by a Russian power group from Belarusian territory on Kiev has made the country worse. Additionally, the suppression of mass protests in the summer of 2020 left the Lukashenko regime with a dwindling domestic support base. Opposition leaders, whether imprisoned or deported, are well organized and united, mainly under the leadership of Ms. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. There are signs that preparations are being made for a new uprising. Mr. Putin's worries at home, given his faltering Ukraine campaign, show that he will not be able to come to the rescue of Mr. Lukashenko as he has in the past. Observers say the capacity of the Belarusian army and riot police to enforce dictatorial orders is now exhausted and cannot be rebuilt. Mr. Lukashenko, like Houdini, has emerged from many political crises intact in the past, but now it is almost entirely dependent on Mr. Putin's goodwill. And that's not a very safe place to be right now. Baev adds that a key difference between the opposition civil society protests currently planned in Belarus and the mass demonstrations in 2020 is that there was almost no hostility towards Russia 2 years ago. But the Ukrainian war significantly changed the attitude of the Belarusian people. It is no exaggeration to say that the Lukashenko regime has faltered. Ukraine's string of military victories will also have an impact on the wider Caucasus, which has been plagued by armed conflict throughout the 1990s until the region was variously pacified by projections of Russian power. The war with Georgia in August 2008 was dubbed Moscow's peacekeeping operation in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, and the support of brutal ruler Ramazan Kadyrov in Chechnya, the dismemberment of Russian military power by the Ukrainians, and the recognition of this weakness by the conflict entrepreneurs is an ominous omen for instability. It does not seem possible for Putin to get out of this spiral. During the process of the Ukraine war, Vladimir Putin will not be able to stop this chaos and eventually will not be able to prevent these reactions.